You're listening to Talking Threat Intelligence, a podcast dedicated to uncovering the new challenges of today's threat landscape. Each episode, we connect with some of the world's leading practitioners to share stories from the front lines of corporate security. And now, on to the show.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Talking Threat Intelligence. I'm your host, Robert Value. And joining me today is Dr. Ben Stickle, Associate Professor of Criminal Justice at Middle Tennessee State University. Ben, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, I'm really glad to be here.
So Ben, you wrote an outstanding feature recently in security management on Porch Piracy. Why did you decide to focus on that in your research?
Well, that's a really great question. I had a wonderful undergraduate student, and she came to my office one day and was talking about package theft. I don't remember what brought that up, but something about it, maybe someone she knew had this experience, and we began looking for some research on it. This was around 2018, and we came to find out there was absolutely nothing on it. It hadn't been defined, hadn't really been even discussed. It was a social media phenomenon, if you will. And so I'd like to say I did what any self-respecting criminologist does when they can't solve a problem. I sat around and watched YouTube videos. So YouTube was about the only place I could find any information on package theft. And it was people posting the thieves who were stealing their packages, usually out of frustration. There were some that were quite humorous if you've ever watched them. And realizing there was no information and nowhere to start, I thought, well, this is all I have, so this is where we're going to get started. So we did a analysis of YouTube videos, mainly. There were a few other companies looking at package theft and doing a crime script analysis to try and find out how and when and the methods for stealing packages and how to prevent them, and produced a decent first paper. A lot of questions that were unanswered in that when you delve into a crime that's really never been studied. And that paper's popularity just blossomed beyond my wildest expectations, and was picked up with lots of news agencies and blogs and a variety of places, and has just since taken me down the path of looking at this more and more. But that's really how it started, just with a question of, hey, what's going on? And the frustration of not being able to find an answer. So we started looking at it.
I think that's so interesting that your research started with YouTube.
I have a history, if you will, of looking at crimes that are difficult to define or undefined. I was a police officer for several years in Kentucky, and went back to school to go teach and started looking at metal theft. And there was almost nobody looking at that at the time either. So I had to go out and do some pretty rigorous field work to try and find out the answers to those questions, and started a new project looking at people who steal pets. And so I like looking at things we don't have easy answers for. So it's been a fun journey.
Did any particular robberies, Porch Piracies, stand out while you were doing your research at the very beginning?
Well, I think at the beginning were some of the more comical ones. So there were a few videos where someone was chased off the property. There was someone who, their partner, I guess, if you will, broke their leg. And so they came and carried the person, drug them off to the car, but they made sure to go back and get the packages.
I think I've seen that one.
Yeah, it's quite humorous. But from a more academic perspective, I guess, if we want to be serious for a minute, I was really quite surprised that we think we saw some videos of people following package delivery vehicles around neighborhoods. We know we saw a couple of people who wore part, at least, of a uniform of a delivery company. It seemed like there were some folks who had what we call dummy packages. So it looked like a fake box, or maybe like a clipboard with a manifest type paperwork attached to it, and kind of as a ruse, if you will. And so it wasn't the common things we were expecting. There were some very interesting aspects. One other very interesting thing is I heard initially from lots of folks, well, this is just maybe homeless people who are out stealing packages, or people who are down their luck. And we did what's kind of scary in social sciences. We tried to define or look at, income levels, socioeconomic status. And that's always risky when you do that. But what we found was there was a lot of thieves who drove BMWs and had Gucci sunglasses and the like, and very few that looked or appeared as though they were extremely down their luck or homeless. And so this wasn't just I'm in need of something, let me steal a package. It seemed to be maybe a upper end of folks doing this, which we thought was very unusual.
Well, you can never really tell what's going on in people's head with this kind of stuff, with profiling. I just had Russ Law on the podcast, and we were talking about a lot more of the high-end white-collar kind of stuff. Like recently, the Moderna CFO was caught doing fraud at their previous employer. And so, kind of that whole discussion came back to, you don't know what's going on in someone's head despite what they might look like, right? So it's interesting that same phenomenon popped up in your research as well. Do we have any other idea about who are the people that are committing these types of crimes?
Very limited research. I was working yesterday on preparing a hopefully a survey to talk with some folks who are involved with this to try and find that question out. I don't know of anything or anyone who's really spoken at any depth with people who are involved with this. The question I often get asked, and is probably one that people who listen to this would be interested in, is, as I've kind of described, that there seems to be some organized element to this. We had thieves who worked in pairs or teams. As I said, it seemed like sometimes they were prepared to commit this theft. And so I do think there's probably an important organized aspect to it. If not during the crime, I think to rid themselves of the items is probably going to have some organization to it that we just don't quite understand at the moment. But that's not to say it doesn't happen the other way. So I think this will be, again, an interesting crime. We certainly saw some folks who appeared as though they were walking home from school. Maybe they kind of dared each other. Somebody went up and stole a package. So we see both planning of the offense that seems well thought out and carried out, but also a lot of folks who just seem to see the opportunity or will seize the opportunity and the package. And so it'll be an interesting mix of both people who've been prepared for this and people who are committing the theft because the opportunity arrives. So that's, again, a little bit different than maybe your typical type of crime.
Do you have any idea in terms of the households that they might be targeting, or the neighborhoods where this is more common, or the type of packages that they might be going for?
Well, that's, again, a difficult question. A lot of the data that we have currently is based off of surveys that are done by private companies. There's nothing wrong with these surveys, but sometimes they're small sample size, maybe a couple hundred to 1,000 folks. And again, depending on how you take the survey, they can be a bit biased. So I'm a little hesitant to give a lot of details. I've seen a study that said that in urban settings, this is more likely. I've also seen a study that said in rural areas, this is more likely. So that's interesting. You'd have both those responses. What I can tell you is from the research that I've conducted and the studies that I've read, and just applying some very basic crime prevention principles to this, this does seem to be a crime centered around opportunity. So it would lead me to believe that in a more urban environment that you're going to have more opportunity with more time. So if you have an individual who's stealing packages, who wants to walk around a neighborhood or even drive around a neighborhood, it would seem to make logical sense. They would do that someplace where there's more houses. So it seems like it could be something that is environmentally driven and therefore more likely to occur in houses that are, closer together. A couple other features that I found doing the first study on the videos was that homes that were closer to the roadway seem to be victimized at a higher rate. And what we concluded from that is the home's setback, if you will, how far it is from the roadway is very important. And that's primarily because whether this is an organized act or just a random occurrence, being able to see that there's a package on someone's front porch is absolutely key. And that's easier to do the closer that the house is to the roadway. So my prediction is very likely that homes that are closer together and closer to the roadway will likely be victims more. As far as packages that are, identified to be stolen, there was a high proportion of packages that had some type of branding on them. So they had the Walmart logo or Chewy or Amazon or something of that nature. This is something that we actually got about halfway through looking at all the videos. And that first study, we had 4 different people, view and code the videos. And I found it so interesting. I sent everyone back and said, rewatch and tell me again if there's brands. And so I think that's going to be, an issue as well. If you're forecasting the retailer where this package came from, that's certainly an issue. And then one other aspect that's similar to this is, at least in the US, you are required, if you ship anything that has a lithium battery, to have a sometimes very large sticker on it that warns about it being flammable. This is a federal law, and it probably is in many other countries in a similar way. And I like to tell people this is like an alert flashing, come steal me. So,
something cool is inside.
There's something valuable, there's something fun, there's something cool, whether that be a phone or a remote controlled car or a drone or something, but it's something probably expensive. And so my concern, to answer your question, is we are leaving packages unattended at a porch. And if that is visible from the roadway, if it is close to the roadway, and it looks like it might be a tempting, valuable target, you combine that together, and I think you just have a higher likelihood of being victim of a theft.
What I think is so interesting about this crime is, in most cases, people kind of know what they're going after. They go to the store. If they're shoplifting something, they know what it is. If they're embezzling funds, it's very obvious. They're going for the money. What with this one, it's kind of like a slot machine where you don't quite know what you're going to get. It could be anything from like tube socks to an MP3 player or something. So it's interesting that would be a target. But again, I guess it's just so easy if you have a house near the roadway to get away.
Yeah, this is an example I've given quite a bit, very similar to what you said. It reminds me of gambling. And, psychologically, how we respond to gambling is entirely different. If you have a bank of vending machines and you put a quarter in, or maybe $2 in now, I guess, to get something to drink, and it steals your money, you'll never go back to that machine. But many people go back to the same gambling establishment over and over again and lose thousands of dollars because there's something psychologically that's different about the hit when you don't know what's going to happen. And I think there's probably a similar relationship going on here. And in fact, I'm working this week with a fellow psychology colleague at my university to develop a survey that's looking at asking some of those questions. So what is it that's intriguing to you about this? I agree. I have a strong notion that some of this activity, again, some, not all, is going to be that rush, if you will, of what's inside the box, and could be terribly exciting or terribly disappointing. And so that leads to a series of other questions, such as what do they do with the items that they don't want? Now, like you said, if it's a six-pack of tube socks, I may just throw it on the side of the road. But there's bound to be items that they're not interested in, but are still have some value. And so where are those being sold? How are they being distributed? Certainly questions we're looking at answering.
It's kind of interesting. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier was you were seeing some of these videos on YouTube. I'm assuming these were posted by victims from their camcorders online. But have you seen any evidence of these actual criminals sharing anything online, like tips or techniques on how to commit these crimes?
I've actually not searched for that. I have a laundry list of to-do items and future research efforts. And I certainly know that people are pretty free and open with sharing things online. I know with retail theft, for example, on YouTube itself's platform, you can, read how to take die packs out and a variety of things. So I have no doubt there is information out there about how to do this and what to do with these products and things like that. But I've not really looked at that yet.
Gotcha. Now, I think that would be an interesting place for a next round of research. How big is this problem? Do we have any estimate on the dollar value that this is costing retailers and consumers?
Yeah, we only have estimates. One of the really big struggles with this, and I'll answer your question by stating this, is that we don't know on any level. So to my knowledge, there are almost no police departments in the United States, and I don't know of any overseas anywhere, that actually track this number. And so in the US, at least, if a package is stolen, if you can get the police to respond, and that's not speaking real negatively, I'm just saying it's a low priority response. And if they complete a report, it would probably be considered just a theft in the all other category. So there's codes for bicycle theft or car theft or purse theft, but there's not a code in most states for package theft. Now, there is some recent legislation in about a dozen or so states to change that. But as it is, very little data from the police is being reported. But even if it was, that's a drop in the bucket compared to what's actually happening. So the secondary issue with this is most retailers and shippers that I'm aware of don't really track this very well either. So they may know they have a certain proportion of shrink once it leaves the warehouse door, but they may not really understand whether that's customer fraud or whether that's a misdelivery, as in delivered to the wrong street, or whether it's actually a theft or whether it's an internal theft. And so I don't even have great numbers from an individual company or a shipping or retail establishment to really get some idea of what's going on. And if there is a company that's keeping this, they're not really publicizing it for a variety of perfectly fine reasons. So the question is, we don't really know. And so what happens is we have estimates. So again, going back to some of the same corporations I mentioned before that do surveys on this, they'll ask, have you been a victim of package theft? We did a similar survey, our second study, we did our own survey, online survey, and we found that about 25% of folks that we surveyed out of 700 had been a victim of package theft, and much higher than that knew someone. What we also found, that was prior to 2020, what we also found is that during the pandemic, we think this number increased dramatically. So it's very likely that we're looking at now 30 to maybe 45% of the U.S. who's been a victim at some point of package theft, which is just astronomical. A recent study by safewise.com, which specializes in home security equipment and a variety of things, they did a pretty large study, and they also incorporated Google searches. They looked at theft rates, and with people who were searching for the terms package theft or my package was stolen, they estimated over 200 million packages were stolen in 2001. Now, if that's correct, the value of those, again, hard to estimate, but 200 million packages, you're more likely to be a victim of package theft than any other crime in the U.S. by a long shot. So this could be one of the most likely crimes you'll ever be a victim of. And again, the price could be, as you pointed out, anywhere from $15 to, $250, really. So I don't really know the actual prevalence of it, nor do I know the cost or the harms, but it's not just the cost that we have to consider either, because you have the expenses to put the item out of the company onto the truck, delivered to your house, and then there's an expense for someone to investigate, even if it's just an online portal of saying a complaint, saying my package was stolen, and then you have to either refund them or reship it. And so really it's a twice victimization, which is very common for retail, but certainly an issue when we look at the price and the real cost of the issue.
Well, I think if you're just thinking about, say, 30% of Americans have been victimized by this crime, I don't know what the population is. I'm not going to do any math on the podcast here because I'm going to look kind of dumb, but multiplied by millions of people, multiplied by $15 a package, we're talking about a very big problem already. And that's just with my made up math off the top of my head. So no, definitely a big issue. What are the implications for, across the industry right now? You were kind of hinting at that because it's not just the dollar cost, but there's also some other things that this can hurt with e-commerce for shippers and retailers and such.
So there's two factors I think that are really important beyond just the cost. The first, and it's really more of a current issue, is most people are aware we're having some supply chain issues pretty much around the world. And they are from the basic materials we need to begin the manufacturing process all the way down to getting the goods to the doorstep. And so it is really disappointing and frustrating to think that so much effort goes into getting a product, sometimes literally all the way around the world, only to let it get stolen at the doorstep is certainly a challenge. And even though we can get products around the world, I think somewhere around 40% of the cost of shipping that product comes in the last mile, right? Which is, a term, if you're not familiar or your listeners are not, is really, it's not necessarily a literal last mile. It's the time and space it takes to go from a warehouse or a retail establishment to the front door. And so there's a tremendous amount of cost there already. Again, just to get it all the way around the world, despite all these shipping problems, and then to have it stolen at the last minute is really frustrating and disappointing. It's something that needs to be very much considered in this. In most places legally, the victim, as in the resident, ends up being the one who is legally responsible. The companies don't have to refund or reship the item. What we're seeing is most of the time companies are willing to do that, and we believe that's primarily for customer satisfaction and brand reputation. In fact, in our second study where we did the survey, we asked some questions about that, primarily focused around the fear of package theft and what people do in response to that fear. And we found that whether this is fair or not, people tended to blame the retailer. So it may have nothing to do with the retailer. They could do everything right. It may have nothing to do with the shipper, but the retailer is the one who gets blamed. And so this is why retailers specifically need to really pay attention to this and consider what they can do to address this issue, because your brand and your sales may suffer. In fact, we asked people if they would purchase something from somewhere else if there was a likely that it would be stolen, and they said yes. And do they purchase less online and less valuable items because of their fear of package theft? And the answer is yes. Really, everyone needs to be involved here. And that we'll just quickly summarize with this, that this is not going to be a policing or law issue that will be solved. We could create laws that say it's against the law, and of course that doesn't usually stop many people. Very difficult for police to investigate. The solutions to come to this are going to really need to involve both the law enforcement, most certainly, but also retailers, shippers, and we really can't count out residents. And this may be an example of where retailers and shippers and others will need to try and convince residents to take certain steps to try and safeguard themselves. So it's a very complex issue.
Well, I think that transitions nicely into the next question that I wanted to ask is, what are the recommendations that you're seeing retailers, shippers, and consumers starting to implement to stop this problem?
Well, everyone's trying something, which is probably a good thing. And that seems to
throw
have
some stuff at the wall and see what works.
Right. Throw some stuff at the wall and see what works. And I'll just pause here and say I have a tremendous number of ideas. And one of the things that I'm looking for is a corporation who has some volume, who's willing to let me experiment. And, really for those who are involved in retail or crime prevention in any way, whether you realize it or not, most of how we know what we know, right, is somebody was willing to take a test and see. So, for example, if I could find a company that would be willing to send unbranded boxes to a part of town where they know they had a lot of theft, we could find out whether that works or not. That aside, I do think there's a variety of things that can occur. I think think, again, retailers can kind of rethink maybe how they are packaging these items and the colors they're using and things of that nature. I think they could consider a price point and perhaps neighborhood risk for as a profile, as an index for whether they should deliver to that home or whether they should require an alternative delivery method. And there's a variety of those. There are parcel lockers that are quite popular in Europe, where you go to a bank of lockers and you scan your barcode and your door opens and you receive your parcel. I don't know that those will catch on real well in the US and probably in other parts of the world where the population just isn't as dense and we're just not used to walking to and from places. So it's fairly inconvenient. And we see that as a real challenge for those types of things. But a company may want to say, look, if we're going to ship you an iPhone, we're going to require you to go to physically somewhere where we can have some control over it. So that's certainly the types of things that retailers can do. Shipping companies have a different opportunity. I think there's probably some room for some training of staff about, how to identify vehicles that might be following them. As I mentioned with the lithium sticker, there's some techniques you could probably train staff that wouldn't take any additional time, such as taking that sticker that's on the box and placing it face down. So it's at least that sticker is not visible from the roadway. Of course, many companies are already incorporating a digital notification saying your package has arrived, and things of that nature are certainly there. It's also possible you might look at shifting delivery hours to later in the day in residential areas. So if more people are at home, say after 3 o'clock, then having a late afternoon shift do a majority of the deliveries so a package isn't left on a resident's porch a majority of the day. So there's a variety of things that can be done there. Lastly, we'll talk about the resident, and this is where I think there's a lot of opportunity. Of course, you can install doorbell cameras and a variety of things of that nature. The jury's out really in my mind on whether those are effective. In the first study we did looking at videos of, doorbell cameras, I didn't see, but I think 5% of the thieves who seemed to care. There was a couple that tried to hide their face. Many of them just looked dead at the camera, saw it was there, took the package and walked away anyway. So I don't know that those are necessarily preventative, but it certainly wouldn't hurt if that's something you're interested in, and it has other benefits as well. I think having something on the porch where a box could be concealed is, a really good idea, whether that's just an actual container or you have a plant or there's a column on the front porch. Something that a package could be slid behind is very helpful, again, because if you remove the visual opportunity, you probably remove the theft. You also have residents who can look at purchasing. They have home parcel lockers. Delivery Safe is one company I'm familiar with that makes a steel box that you place on your front porch. It has a code. Delivery person can place a package securely inside of it. And of course, that works on multiple levels. A, it's hard to steal, and B, it removes the visual stimulus to take the package. Ultimately, I think that this will also come down to how we construct homes. So this is a real challenge. And, it's difficult to speak with you as folks have different experiences all over the country and around the world. But, in a lot of northern climates and older homes, we used to have a coal chute, right? So a truck would come and dump coal in your basement. And you'd, shove that into your heater system. Well, we don't put those in houses anymore because we don't need them. A lot of older houses used to have a milk box where you could deliver milk to the inside of a house. And so I think what it's time for is a real rethinking of the front porch. And so we're going to have to consider how we design homes to be able to receive these types of parcels in a secure way. And it really goes beyond just theft. You could look at weather can damage parcels and animals and a variety of things. So this is something that ultimately I think we'll have to kind of redesign how we build houses, and especially apartments. It's a very big challenge there. A lot of apartments were not structured and built for this volume of packages. So there's basically, to summarize, there's something everybody can do, and it will take probably all of that and more to really address this issue.
I like that suggestion about redesigning homes. I mean, just 10 years ago, we weren't getting the type of packages we are now. And then, of course, COVID just sends everything through the roof. So, no, I like that perspective on the team effort that everyone needs to be involved. How do you see this problem evolving over the next few years? Are you optimistic that this is going to be a bit less of an issue, say, 10 years from now?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, they'll keep you busy.
I like to tell people that this is a low-level entry crime. So, if you think about many other crimes, stealing a car really takes a little bit of skill. I mean, if you just happen to find, the keys randomly around, then maybe joyriding takes less skill. But burglary and a lot of retail theft, those take a little bit of skill. It also takes a bit of guts and fortitude to walk into somewhere and do that. So that's why I'm a little bit concerned, because anyone who is watching the news around Christmas time is going to see news stories about this. Anyone who's on social media is going to see videos of this, and that anyone goes, oh, well, I could do that. And it really is that easy. So there's no entering of a home. There's no special knowledge. There's no skills required. I go for walks in my neighborhood. I'm just amazed at the number of packages. Of course, I have a bit of a problem because I'm so interested in this. So I'll count, the number of packages in my neighborhood, and it's somewhere like 25 to 30% of the homes, will have a package on the front porch at like 5 p.m.
As I was prepping for this episode, as I was out for a walk this morning, I was like, oh yeah, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there. And it's easy to imagine doing it.
You will see it everywhere. And again, so here, the opportunity is only going to increase. So as the opportunity increases at an exponential rate, which we saw a huge shift because, as you mentioned, of COVID, but that level of home purchasing has dropped a bit, but has remained pretty stable since late 2020. So the increase is going to occur, coupled with how easy this is and the low risk, the ease of entry. I'm afraid this is just going to increase. And I don't know that anything that we're doing currently is going to catch up for quite a while. So maybe 10 years, maybe it is better. I don't know. You said 10 years, but in the short term, I don't think it's going to be better at all.
Right. All right, Ben, let's take this thing home. How can listeners learn more about your work and get in touch if they want to reach out?
Sure. Well, I'm available at benstickle.com. And my last name is Stickle. You can reach out there. I have a couple different pages there, but there's one on package theft that has a variety of other interviews that I've done, articles that I've written, both for magazines and for newspapers, and my academic work as well. And usually you can find a way to contact me via that if you'd like to reach out. As I said, I'm certainly happy to discuss any of this with anyone who's listening, who's having a challenge or an issue with this or looking for some methods to prevent this. Ultimately, as I mentioned, I think at the beginning, coming from a law enforcement background and really bent on solving crime, right? This is an area that I think I can help. So I try not to be the academic studying things that don't matter, but I want to actually apply basic skills and things that we know about crime and how criminals work to preventing crime. So any way that I can prevent this and try and stop this from happening is what I'm interested in doing, and would be happy to talk and partner with anybody who has any ideas or information.
All right. Well, I think you got quite a hot niche at the moment, because I don't think it's going away anytime soon. All right, Ben, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Again, that was Ben Stickle, Associate Professor of Criminal Justice at Middle Tennessee State University. Thanks for listening to Talking Threat Intelligence. Never miss an episode by subscribing to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you listen to episodes. And if you'd like more insights on building a successful threat intelligence program, be sure to check out our website at liferappinc.com/blog. That's liferappinc.com/blog. And I hope you tune in next time.